I woke up to the sound of broken dishes and Peyton's loud shriek. The clock read 6:30 in the morning. I pulled on my old robe and hurried into the kitchen where my sister-in-law was already sweeping up the coffee cup shards. "Beverly, for God's sake, don't go barefoot in here," she said irritably, not even looking at me. "You'll cut yourself, and then we'll have to go to the emergency room. 15 years ago, when my Eugene died, I couldn't have imagined that at 78 I would feel like a stranger in the house my husband and I had bought back in the 80s. A house in a quiet Mountain Brook neighborhood that I still cleaned every week, despite the arthritis in my joints. A house I'd naively signed over to my only son 5 years ago, so there wouldn't be any inheritance problems. I just wanted to help," I mumbled, backing toward the doorway. "Thanks, I can handle it," Peyton cut me off, throwing the shards away. "Better wake up the kids. They'll oversleep again." It was my daily duty to wake my grandchildren, 11-year-old Hugo and 9-year-old Alwyn. I walked slowly up the stairs, clinging to the banister. Once I'd run up these stairs without thinking. Now each step required concentration. Hugo's room greeted me with the smell of worn socks and clothes strewn across the floor. The boy slept with his face buried in his pillow, his head and his hair disheveled under the blanket. "Hugo, honey, it's time to get up." I shook him gently by the shoulder. His grandson stirred unhappily, but didn't open his eyes. "5 more minutes, Grandma," he mumbled. "Your mom's already in the kitchen, and if you're late," the mere mention of Peyton set off the alarm. Hugo sat up abruptly on the bed, rubbing his eyes. "I'm getting up now." Children feared their mother's anger more than anything else in the world. Peyton rarely raised his voice, but her cold frustration was scarier than any shout. My grandson was already forming the same trait in my grandson that his father had. The fear of disappointing, of not meeting expectations. A different world awaited me in Alwyn's room. Neatly folded clothes on a chair, books on a shelf in alphabetical order. The girl had inherited her mother's pedantry. It was easier to wake her up. It was enough to open the door and call her name softly. "Good morning, grandmother." Alwyn stretched and got out of bed at once. "What's for breakfast today?" "I don't know, dear. Your mom is cooking something." I smiled. "Wash up quickly." As I walked back downstairs to the kitchen, I heard the front door slam as Garrett went for a run. Every morning at 6, my son was required to run 5 kilometers around the neighborhood, regardless of the weather. Discipline and regimen were his religion. At 45, he looked barely 35, a fact of which he was invariably proud. In the kitchen, Peyton was putting oatmeal on plates, checking her phone. 225 calories per serving, she murmured, measuring each spoonful with the precision of a pharmacist. "Beverly, there's your yogurt in the fridge if you want some." The yogurt was specially bought for me, diet, non-fat, and of questionable flavor. "It's good for your age," Peyton told the store without asking my opinion. I silently pulled out a can and sat down at the table, trying not to take up too much space. The kitchen was Peyton's pride, the gleaming chrome surfaces, the minimalist design, no unnecessary items. 5 years ago, she and Garrett had decided to renovate the house I'd lived in for almost 40 years. My old floral patterned curtains were gone, cozy armchairs were replaced with designer chairs, and pictures of Eugene moved from the mantelpiece to a box in the attic. "Mom, don't sit in the aisle," Garrett returned from his run, breathing heavily. He kissed Peyton on the cheek and opened the refrigerator. "Where's my protein shake?" In the back, as usual, Peyton turned off the stove. "Are the kids up yet?" "Yeah, they're washing up," I replied, stirring the yogurt. No one thanked me for waking the kids up. It was just implied, like so many of my other duties in this house. I remembered Garrett snuggling up to me in the mornings as a child, Eugene and I making him blueberry pancakes on Sundays. Now, Sunday breakfast was just as rigorous as weekdays. Protein shake, oatmeal, measured calories. The family breakfast was strangely silent, broken only by the clinking of spoons against plates and Peyton's occasional remarks about the day ahead. "Alwyn has choir practice today and needs to be picked up at 4:30. Beverly, can you make it?" "Sure," I replied, even though I had a doctor's appointment at 4. "I'll have to reschedule." "And stop by the store for groceries. I'll text the list to your phone," Peyton continued, keeping her eyes on her plate. "Okay," I agreed again. Garrett quickly finished his drink and got up from the table. I have to go. The meeting was at 8:30. He worked as a middle manager for an insurance company, and he always talked about his job as if the fate of the world depended on it. As a young man, Garrett had dreamed of being an artist, but pragmatism had taken over and he'd chosen a stable career. Sometimes I noticed the longing in his eyes as he looked at pictures in magazines or walked past an art gallery. But more often than not, his eyes expressed only fatigue and irritation. After Garrett and the kids left for school, the house fell into a strange silence. Peyton worked remotely 3 days a week, and today was one of those days. She retired to her office, closing the door tightly, and I went about my daily routine: dishes, laundry, cleaning. I'd once been a hostess in this house. Now I was a free housekeeper. Not that Peyton or Garrett demanded it of me, but somehow it was implied that since I lived with them, I should be useful. My modest pension went to general expenses, and I kept my personal spending to a minimum. A small mirror hung over the sink. I paused, gazing into my reflection. I'd dyed my gray hair before, but I'd stopped in recent years. It was too troublesome and expensive. Wrinkles furrowed my face like streams furrow dry ground. The eyes, once bright blue, had now faded to a faded gray. "You're still beautiful, Bev," Eugene had said, even in the last year of his life. I smiled at the memory and wiped my hands on my apron. My phone beeped. A text came in from Peyton with a shopping list. 23 items, including a special kind of quinoa that was only sold at the organic store across town. I sighed and went to change. On the bus, I sat by the window, looking out at the familiar streets of Mountain Brook. The town had changed over the years, with new buildings and the old stores where Eugene and I used to buy fresh bread and spices. Now there were chain coffee shops and boutiques with clothes I could never afford. The organic store played quiet music, and the young girl at the register looked through me like I was a ghost. I walked slowly between the shelves, checking the list, trying not to forget anything. Peyton got very annoyed if I bought the wrong kind of flour or the wrong kind of yogurt. "Can I help you?" A young man in a store apron suddenly asked. "I'm looking for quinoa," I replied, pointing to the list on my phone. Right around the corner, on the second shelf, he smiled at me with that special smile that people smile at very old or very small people. Condescending and a little pitying. When I finished shopping, I sank heavily onto the bench at the bus stop. My bags were weighing down my arms, my back was aching, and it was still 15 minutes before the bus. My old cell phone rang. Peyton. "Beverly, could you stop by the drugstore? I need vitamins, the ones I always take." "But the drugstore's on the other side of the street," I said cautiously. "I'd have to take a transfer." "It's so important." Peyton sounded impatient. "I need them today, and don't forget to pick up Alwyn after choir." She disconnected before I could respond. Sighing, I changed my route. I didn't get to the pharmacy until 3 o'clock. My back hurt so bad I had to stop every few minutes. Peyton's vitamins were surprisingly expensive, but I couldn't go back without them. Besides, I had to get to school in time to pick up Alwyn. The school greeted me with the hum of children's voices and the smell of chalk. I sat down on a bench in the hallway waiting for rehearsal to end. From the ajar door came singing, clear children's voices singing some modern song I didn't know. "Mrs. Thorpe?" The music teacher's voice brought me out of my reverie. "Are you in favor of Alwyn?" "Rehearsal ended 5 minutes ago." I shuddered and looked at my watch. I had indeed dozed off on the bench and missed the end of rehearsal. Alwyn was standing next to the teacher, clutching the strap of her backpack tightly, and looking at me with barely concealed disappointment. "I'm sorry, honey," I mumbled, rising. "I'm a little tired today." "That's all right, grandmother," Alwyn replied politely. But I could hear my mother's intonation in her voice, the same restrained coolness. On the way home, Alwyn talked about school, about the upcoming concert, about her new friend. I listened, half listening, thinking about how tired I was from the day before. My doctor's appointment had to be canceled. Now I had to wait 2 weeks for my next appointment. Peyton met us at home, working at the kitchen table with her laptop. "You're late," she said, looking at her watch. Hugo had already gotten back from practice a half hour ago. "The bus was late," I lied, not wanting to admit I'd dozed off at school. "My vitamins?" Peyton held out her hand. I pulled a box out of my bag and handed it to her. No thanks were forthcoming. Peyton just set the vitamins next to her laptop and went back to work. What's for dinner? Alwyn asked, looking in the refrigerator. Lasagna, Peyton answered. Beverly, you'll make it, right? The recipe's in that blue folder. It wasn't a question, more of a statement. Of course I'll make it. I always made dinner on Wednesdays and Fridays when Peyton worked late. The problem was that tonight my hands were refusing to obey. Arthritis was especially agonizing in rainy weather. Why don't we order pizza? I suggested cautiously. Today my hands... Pizza? Peyton raised her eyebrows. Hugo got heartburn from their sauce last time. And then I already defrosted the lasagna stuffing. But if you can't, I'll make it myself. Her tone made it clear that it would be a big favor. No, I can handle it, I said hurriedly, heading for the stove. It took almost 2 hours to cook. By the time the lasagna was in the oven, I could barely stand on my feet from exhaustion. Garrett got home from work at 7, threw his briefcase on a chair, and went straight out to change. No one asked how my day was going. No one noticed my sore, reddened hands. At dinner, Garrett talked about problems at work, Peyton about a difficult client, the kids about school. I ate in silence, thinking about washing Hugo's school uniform and ironing Garrett's shirts tomorrow. Grandma, you're not listening. Hugo's voice brought me back to reality. I'm sorry, honey. I was thinking, I smiled. What were you saying? I asked if you could help me with my history project this weekend. I need to make a model of a medieval castle. I opened my mouth to answer, but Peyton beat me to it. Hugo, Grandma gets tired of this kind of thing. Daddy and I will help you, won't we, Garrett? Garrett nodded, not taking his eyes off the phone he was checking between bites. But I wanted to go with Grandma, Hugo said stubbornly. She helped with the dinosaur last time, and I got an A. I'd love to help, I smiled at my grandson. I have some ideas for the castle. Peyton pursed her lips but didn't say anything. After dinner, I gathered the dishes and started washing while the others went about their business. The sound of the TV came from the living room. Garrett was watching the news. The kids had retired to their rooms. Hugo was playing computer games. Alwyn was reading a book. Peyton was working in the study. Finished with the dishes, I went upstairs to my room, small but cozy. Once a guest bedroom, it was now my only corner of the house where I could be myself. It was where I kept Eugene's pictures, old letters, books I loved to reread. I sat down on the bed and pulled a photo album from the nightstand. Here was Eugene and me at the wedding. Young, happy, hopeful. Here's little Garrett on his first bicycle. Here's the three of us picnicking by the lake. Once upon a time, we had a real family. A knock on the door made me flinch. Grandma? Hugo poked his head into the room. Can I come in? Sure, honey. I patted the bed beside me. My grandson climbed up beside me and peered into the album. Is that Grandpa? He asked, pointing to the picture of Eugene. Yes, your grandpa when he was 35. He looks like Dad, Hugo said. Very much, I agreed. Only your grandfather smiled more. Hugo flipped through the pages of the album, asking questions about the people in the pictures. I told him stories from the past, enjoying this rare moment of intimacy. Is it true that you used to be a teacher? He suddenly asked. It's true, I smiled. I taught middle school literature for almost 30 years. And did you like it? Very much. I loved my students, loved the books we studied. Why did you stop? I retired. And then your grandfather got sick, and I had to take care of him. Hugo nodded with a serious look. Do you like living with us? He asked suddenly. The question took me by surprise. What could I say to a 10-year-old boy? That I felt unwanted in my own home, that his mother looked upon me as a burden, that his father, my only son, seemed to have forgotten that I existed as a human being and not as a free helper? Of course, honey, I lied, stroking his head. I love being with you. Hugo! Peyton's voice from the hallway made us both wince. It's time for bed. What are you doing in Grandma's room? We were looking at pictures, Hugo answered, jumping off the bed. It's late. Peyton stood in the doorway with her arms crossed over her chest. It's time for Grandma to rest too. She'd had a hard day. There was no concern in her voice, only irritation. Hugo gave me a quick kiss on the cheek and ran out of the room. Peyton lingered for a moment, glancing at the album in my lap. Garrett wanted me to remind you that you have a doctor's appointment tomorrow, she said. 10 o'clock in the morning. He'll pick you up after the meeting. Thank you, I said quietly, even though the appointment was for another time. But there was no point in arguing. Peyton nodded and closed the door. I was alone in the room that had once been a guest room in my own house. I carefully tucked the album back into the nightstand and lay down without turning on the light. In the darkness, I whispered, Eugene, if you could have seen what our family had become. The ceiling was silent, as it always was in response to my nightly monologues. Somewhere in the house, the television was on, doors were slamming, water was running through the pipes. Life went on around me, but not with me. I lay in the dark, remembering how I had once been needed, important, loved. Now I was just a shadow, an old woman tolerated out of a sense of duty, a stranger in my own home. I apologize for exceeding the limit. Let me recalculate and write a chapter between 9,000 characters. The morning started with a loud conversation in the kitchen. I was still in bed when I heard the excited voices of Peyton and Garrett. They rarely spoke with such enthusiasm, and my curiosity overrode my desire to nap a little longer. Putting on my robe, I went downstairs. Garrett and Peyton were sitting at a table with a laptop and cups of coffee, so engrossed in conversation that they hadn't even noticed my arrival. I think Pine Terrace is the perfect place, Peyton said, showing me something on the screen. They have a platinum anniversary package just for events like this. It looks good, Garrett nodded. But the price? 20 years of marriage deserves a special celebration. Peyton put her hand on his shoulder. Besides, we can afford it after your promotion. I coughed delicately, and they both turned to me. Good morning, I smiled. Celebrating something? Oh, Mom, Garrett leaned back in his chair. We're just picking a place to celebrate our anniversary. It'll be 20 years next month. 20 years, I shook my hands. How quickly time flies. I remember when you guys met at that corporate event. Yeah, Peyton interrupted me with a strained smile. We're thinking of having a small reception for close friends and coworkers. Nothing fancy, just 50 people. 50 people didn't sound like a small reception to me, but I kept my mouth shut. In the 20 years they'd been together, Garrett and Peyton had drifted away from a lot of old friends, but they'd grown a lot of business acquaintances and coworkers I barely knew by name. That's a great idea. I walked over to the coffee maker. Is there anything I can do to help with the preparations? Peyton and Garrett exchanged quick glances. Actually, Garrett began slowly, we were thinking of hiring an event planner. Peyton has too much work to do, but I could do the invitations or the decorations, I offered, pouring myself a cup of coffee. After all, I organized a lot of school events when I taught. Thanks, Beverly, Peyton closed her laptop. But this is different. Modern techniques require a certain approach. We want everything to be classy and elegant. Her words sounded like I was suggesting we decorate the room with paper garlands and balloons. I turned my back to the window to hide my offense. Of course I understand. Garrett looked at his watch and jumped up. I have to go. The meeting's at 9. He kissed Peyton, nodded at me, and ran out of the kitchen. I was alone with my sister-in-law, who was already engrossed in her phone, going through her email. Taking a sip of coffee, I decided to give it another try. For Eugene and I's 20-year anniversary, we had a picnic by the lake. Nothing extravagant, but it was such a heartwarming day. Peyton looked up from the phone with an expression of polite patience. Very nice, Beverly, but times have changed. It's customary to celebrate such events differently. She stood up, picking up the cups from the table. You don't have to worry about organizing. Just come and enjoy the festivities. With these words, she left for her home office, leaving me alone with an unfinished coffee and a feeling of being unwanted. The next few days turned into an endless stream of anniversary talk. Every night, Garrett and Peyton discussed the menu, the decor, the guest list, and each other's gifts. I tried not to interfere, but sometimes I couldn't help but comment. Maybe instead of steaks, we should offer a choice between fish and meat, I cautiously remarked when they were discussing the menu. Some people have stomach problems and heavy meat. Mom, Garrett sighed, Pine Terrace has a Michelin-starred chef. He knows what he's doing. Plus, Peyton added, we'll have a separate vegetarian menu for those who prefer plant-based food. I was just thinking, I started, but Peyton was already discussing the wine list with Garrett. A few days later, I caught Peyton looking at the sample invitations. The colorful gold-embossed cards were spread out on the kitchen table. They're beautiful. I sat down next to her. You know, when Garrett was little, I used to make his birthday invitations by hand. Each one was special. Really? Peyton raised an eyebrow, still looking at the samples. That's nice, but we need something a little more professional. I understand, I nodded. But maybe we could do something special for our closest friends, personalized? Peyton finally pulled away from the cards and looked at me with ill-concealed irritation. Beverly, we have 54 guests, and all of them will receive the same high-quality invitations from a professional designer. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but please let me handle the organization as I see fit. Her tone left no room for objection. I quietly apologized and went to my room feeling like a told-off schoolgirl. That same night, I overheard Peyton complaining to Garrett. She's always meddling with outdated ideas, she said in a muffled voice. Homemade invitations, picnics by the lake. It's not a kid's birthday party. Mom just wants to help, Garrett replied, but there was no real defense in his voice. She's from a different generation. I understand, but it's starting to get on my nerves. Can't she see that her advice is inappropriate? I quietly backed away from the living room door where they were talking and went up to my room. From a different generation. The words hurt more than the overt rudeness. It was as if my age made me unnecessary, unable to understand the modern world. The next morning at breakfast, Peyton announced that she'd invited the event organizer to tea to discuss the details. Miss Ainsworth is coming at 2, she announced. She was organizing an anniversary party for Margaret from my office, and it was just perfect. I was just about to bake a blueberry pie, I said. I could offer it for tea. Peyton wrinkled her nose. Actually, Melanie favors a gluten-free diet. I've already ordered matching brownies from that new pastry shop on Oak Street. Oh, I lowered my gaze to my oatmeal. Then, I'll just clean up the living room before she gets here. Don't worry, Peyton finished her coffee. I've called a cleaning service for the morning. They'll do everything professionally. Every word she said sounded like a reminder of my uselessness. I couldn't help organize or bake a pie or even clean the house I'd once kept spotlessly clean for years. Melanie Ainsworth was a slender woman of about 35, with perfectly styled brown hair and a suit that must have cost as much as my monthly pension. She entered the house with the confidence of someone accustomed to command and immediately charmed Peyton with her ideas. I see an elegant silver and blue color scheme, she said, laying out fabric swatches and photographs on the coffee table. 20 years is a platinum anniversary, so we can play up the theme. It's perfect, Peyton marveled. I sat in the corner of the living room, feeling invisible. No one had introduced me to the organizer, and I didn't dare interfere with their lively conversation. How about a photo op? Melanie suggested. We could create an elegant nook for memorable shots, maybe with family photos from different years. Oh, I love that idea, Peyton brightened up. We have some wonderful pictures from our wedding, honeymoon, the birth of our children. I have some old pictures of Garrett as a kid, I ventured. And your silver-framed wedding picture that you gave me. Peyton turned to me as if she'd just noticed my presence. Thank you, Beverly, but we'll probably go with the more modern photographs. Professional. Sure. I clasped my hands in my lap. I was just thinking. Speaking of photos, Melanie interrupted, I'd recommend a professional photo shoot for the whole family before the event. These pictures can be shown on the screens during the reception. That's a brilliant idea. Peyton clapped her hands together. Garrett will be thrilled. He always says we don't have enough family portraits. I rose silently and went into the kitchen to put the kettle on. Their voices followed me, discussing the details of the photo shoot, the outfits, the locations. No one noticed me leaving. In the evening, when Garrett returned from work, I heard Peyton complaining to him about me. She kept interrupting Melanie and me with her old-fashioned ideas, she said. Honey jars, Garrett. Can you believe this? We're not at a farmer's market. What do you want me to do? Garrett's voice sounded tired. Stop her from talking? Just talk to her. Explain that we want to organize a modern, classy event. That her advice is, inappropriate. Okay, I'll talk, Garrett sighed. But he never found the time for that conversation. Instead, in the days that followed, he and Peyton simply stopped discussing the anniversary preparations in my presence. I'd catch snippets of their conversations, see them leaning over their laptops looking at something, but as soon as I entered the room, the topic changed. One morning, about 2 weeks before the celebration, I went down to the kitchen and found a stack of glossy invitations on the table. They were elegant, silver and blue, embossed and calligraphed. I picked one up carefully, admiring the quality of the paper. What are you doing? Peyton's sharp voice made me flinch. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, eyeing me suspiciously. Just looking, I quickly put the invitation back. They're really pretty. Thank you, her voice softened, but only slightly. I was just about to sign them. The next day, Peyton pulled me aside as the kids left to get ready for school. Beverly, she began in a low voice, I wanted to talk to you about the photo shoot. It's scheduled for next Saturday at Riverview Park. Yeah, I heard. I nodded. What time do I need to be ready? Peyton hesitated, fiddling with the bracelet on her wrist. Actually, we were thinking of doing 2 sets of pictures. One with just us and the kids, for the press wall at the reception, and one with the extended family, including you. I was slow to realize the meaning of her words. I wasn't to be seen in the official photos that would be shown to the guests. I understand, I replied quietly, though I felt a twinge of resentment inside. It's nothing personal, Peyton hastened to add. It's just that the concept of the event needs a certain visuals. You understand, don't you? No, I didn't. I didn't understand how anyone could be ashamed of their own mother or mother-in-law enough to exclude her from family photos. I didn't understand how my son could agree to that. But I nodded because there was no point in arguing. Sure, I said, turning away to hide my trembling lips. I'll come back later when you're done with the main shoot. Great, Peyton visibly relaxed. I'll let you know the exact time. The day before the photo shoot, Garrett unexpectedly stopped by my room where I was sitting, going through old photos. Mom, he shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot. Peyton said she talked to you about the shoot tomorrow. Yeah, I looked at him straight on. It's okay, Garrett. I realize I don't fit into your concept, he frowned. It's not that, it's just that Peyton wants everything to be perfect. It's a big day for us. And I'm the obstacle to perfection? The words came out before I could stop them. Garrett sighed and ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he'd inherited from his father. You know I didn't, please don't make this harder than it has to be. And don't say anything in front of the kids. They'll be upset if they realize you're hurt. He didn't deny that I was a liability. He just asked me to be comfortable, to be quiet, not to cause trouble. I never intentionally upset children, I replied quietly. And you should know that. Garrett nodded, clearly relieved that the conversation was shorter than he'd expected. Thank you, Mom. I'm sorry about all this. He didn't specify exactly what he was apologizing for excluding me from the pictures, for letting Peyton call the shots, or for the general neglect I felt more and more every day. But it was the first apology in a long time, and I accepted it gratefully. It's okay, I smiled at him. I'll be ready tomorrow. The tension in the house was building as the date of the celebration approached. Peyton was getting more and more irritable, nagging over little things, often raising her voice at the kids. Garrett spent more time at work, obviously avoiding the home atmosphere. I tried to remain inconspicuous, performing my duties quietly and efficiently. The evening before the photo shoot, when the kids were already asleep, I overheard another argument between Peyton and Garrett. I'm just saying it seems weird, Garrett said. She is my mother, after all. And I just want us to look like the perfect family in the guest photos. Peyton cut Peyton off. I've put too much into organizing this event to have it ruined by bad pictures. Unfortunate because my mother would be in them? Garrett's voice sounded strained. Don't twist it. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Beverly. She doesn't look like... Peyton paused, searching for words. I mean, have you seen the way she dresses? And those old-fashioned hairstyles? That's why we bought her a new dress, Garrett reminded her. And we can suggest a salon. It's not just the clothes, Peyton sighed. Everything about her screams old. Old age, outdated attitudes. It's like she's from another era. I don't want our business partners to see that. This, Garrett's voice trembled, or her. There was silence. I leaned against the wall in the hallway, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. They were discussing me like some inconvenient thing that couldn't be gotten rid of, but could at least be hidden away. Don't be dramatic, Peyton finally said. I'm not saying she shouldn't be at the party, just not in all the pictures, not in the ones that everyone will see. Okay, Garrett gave in, but we'll do both shoots respectfully, okay? I don't want her to feel excluded. Peyton mumbled something back, but I wasn't listening. Quietly, trying not to squeak the floorboards, I went up to my room and closed the door. In the dark, I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, staring out the window at Mountain Brook at night. Old age, outdated attitudes, from another era, as if they were crimes for which I was being punished by exclusion from my own family's life. As if the years I had lived made me less worthy of love and respect, not more. Tomorrow I will smile for the camera when they let me. I will wear the dress they choose and the hairstyle they deem acceptable. I will play the role of the obedient grandmother, having no opinion of my own, not interfering with their perfect picture. But something inside had snapped, something that could no longer be fixed with a new dress or a stylish hairstyle. The tension in the house became physically palpable, like a heavy blanket that made it hard to breathe. And I saw no way to change it. I sincerely apologize for going over the limit. I'll be strictly within 9,000. 100,000 characters. I woke up at dawn when the first rays of the sun were just beginning to break through the curtains. Today was family photo shoot day at Riverview Park. Despite the overheard conversation from yesterday, I was determined to do my best to look dignified. If I was only going to appear in the secondary photos, I wanted to look my best in them. The first thing I did when I got out of bed was to get the new dress that Peyton and Garrett had bought for me. It was hanging in my closet in a protective cover from an expensive boutique. I carefully unzipped the zipper of the pouch and pulled out the dress, a navy blue dress with long sleeves and a modest neckline. The fit was simple, but the fabric was expensive and pleasant to the touch. Putting the dress on the bed, I went to the bathroom. Last night, I'd washed my hair and applied the nourishing mask I'd bought at the drugstore. Today, I planned to style them neatly, maybe even try something new. After taking a shower, I scrutinized my face in the mirror. The wrinkles had gotten deeper over the past few years, especially around my eyes and mouth. I used to wear makeup regularly, but after Eugene's death, I'd gradually given up the habit. Why bother if no one notices? But today was a special day. I pulled an old makeup bag out of the drawer and spread its contents on the shelf. Looking at the result in the mirror, I saw the reflection of a woman who had once been attractive and still retained traces of that beauty. My blue eyes, though surrounded by wrinkles, still shone brightly. My mother always said my eyes were my best jewelry. Back in the bedroom, I dressed carefully. The dress fit well, though it was a little loose in the waist. I'd continued to lose weight in recent months, not from dieting, but from constant stress and anxiety. I added a simple string of pearls, a gift from Eugene for our 30th anniversary, and a silver bracelet that had once belonged to my mother. Glancing at my watch, I realized I still had time before the photo shoot began. The main shoot for Garrett, Peyton, and the kids was scheduled for 10 in the morning, and I'd been told to arrive at 11:30. I was to take the bus to the park on my own since Garrett and Peyton were leaving early. I walked down to the kitchen where the family was already eating breakfast. Alwyn was wearing a soft blue dress with a white sash, and Hugo was wearing navy blue pants and a blue shirt. Peyton looked gorgeous in a light gray suit that perfectly accentuated her slender figure. Garrett matched her. Gray suit, blue shirt, no tie. "Good morning," I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. Everyone turned to me, and for a moment there was silence in the kitchen. "Wow, Grandma." Hugo was the first to react. "You look great." "Thank you, darling," I smiled, feeling a rush of warmth from his sincere reaction. "Mom, you look great." Garrett seemed surprised, as if he hadn't expected to see me like this. "Very elegant," Peyton added, and I could see the mixture of surprise and discomfort in her eyes. The dress fit well. Breakfast passed in an unusually upbeat mood. The children were excited about the photo shoot. Peyton was giving them final instructions on how to behave in front of the camera, and Garrett was glancing at his watch, obviously worried that they might be late. "Okay, we should go," Peyton announced, getting up from the table. "Beverly, you remember you have to be there?" 11:30, I finished for her. "Don't worry, I haven't forgotten." "The bus will take you almost all the way to the park." Garrett put the route card next to me. "Get off at the Riverview stop, and it's only a 5-minute walk from there." When the door closed behind them, I was alone in the empty house. Silence enveloped me, giving me a rare moment of peace and solitude. I slowly finished my coffee, thinking about the day ahead. The nervous tension was building, but I decided not to give in to it. After all, it's only a photo shoot. What could possibly go wrong? At 10:45, I left the house and headed for the bus stop. The day was surprisingly warm and sunny for late September. The sky was clear, bright blue, and a light breeze pleasantly cooled my face. Perfect weather for a photo shoot. The bus arrived on time, and I sat at the window, watching the familiar streets of Mountain Brook float by. Riverview Park was on the north side of the city, in one of the most upscale neighborhoods. There were beautiful walkways, a small lake, and a Japanese garden, a favorite spot for wedding photo shoots and family portraits. Getting off at the right stop, I immediately noticed the signs to the park. The 5-minute walk to the entrance was pleasant, although I was careful not to get my shoes dirty or my hair mussed. I stopped at the main gate to check the time. 11:20. I was a little early, but I figured it was better to wait at the venue than to be late. As I approached the garden, I could see my family from afar. They were standing on a decorative bridge over a small pond surrounded by flowering bushes and decorative stones. The photographer, a young woman in jeans and a t-shirt, was giving them instructions, helping them to get the best poses. An assistant stood nearby with additional equipment. I stood aside, not wanting to interrupt the filming process. Peyton and Garrett were standing next to each other, his arm around her waist. The kids were in front of them, Alwyn with perfectly styled hair, and Hugo with a serious expression he rarely showed at home. They looked like a model family from an advertisement for expensive real estate or a private school. A few minutes later, Hugo spotted me and waved happily. "Grandma's here," he shouted, breaking the perfect composition. Everyone turned in my direction. Peyton instantly tensed, her smile frozen on her face. Garrett looked slightly embarrassed. The photographer lowered her camera and looked at them questioningly. "I'm probably early," I said, stepping closer. "I can wait until you guys are done?" No, we're almost done with this series." The photographer smiled at me. "You must be the grandmother. I'm Sydney, your photographer for the day." "Beverly Thorpe?" I extended my hand, which she shook firmly. "Nice to meet you." "We were supposed to start shooting with you at 11:30, Peyton reminded me, glancing at her watch. "There's still time." "That's okay," Sydney said. "We can start the extended family shoot now and then go back to the other compositions. How's that for a plan?" Peyton clearly wasn't thrilled with the idea, but she didn't argue in front of a stranger. "Sure," she said tautly. "Whatever you say." "Great!" Sydney nodded vigorously. "Beverly, let's put you next to Garrett. Kids, stand in front of Grandma. Peyton, you're on the other side of your husband." I took the designated spot, feeling Garrett tense up slightly as I stood next to him. Peyton gave me a sizing glance, as if checking to see if I'd spoil the composition with my presence. "Everybody smile," Sydney commanded, picking up the camera. "Relax, pretend you're just enjoying a walk in the park." I tried to smile naturally, even though the atmosphere was far from relaxed. Sydney took a few shots, then asked us to change our poses. "Now let's take some shots on the bench," she suggested, pointing to a carved wooden bench under a cherry blossom tree. Garrett and Peyton would sit in the middle, the kids on either side, and Beverly would stand behind them. We obediently took the designated seats. The sun was shining directly into my eyes, and I squinted slightly. "Beverly, could you move a little to the left?" Sydney asked. "The lighting will be better that way." I took a step to the left, but Peyton stood up abruptly. "Wait," she said in a strained voice. "I don't think this composition is working." Sydney lowered the camera, looking slightly puzzled. What exactly is bothering you? Peyton walked over to the photographer and started quietly saying something to her, occasionally casting glances in my direction. I couldn't hear them talking, but I could tell by the look on Sydney's face that it was about me. The photographer nodded a few times, then turned back to us with a tortured smile. Let's try a different composition, she suggested. Maybe we could get some shots of Grandma and her grandchildren first. For the next 20 minutes, I obediently followed Sydney's instructions, posing with the grandchildren in different backgrounds in the park. The kids seemed happy to spend time with me, especially Hugo, who kept showing me something interesting: an unusual rock, a brightly colored butterfly, a fancy cloud. When we were taking pictures by a small lily pond, I took an awkward step and almost slipped on the wet ground. My foot twisted and I lost my balance, instinctively grabbing for the nearest support, an ornamental willow branch hanging over the water. The branch wasn't as strong as I'd hoped, and it snapped with a snap. I held on, but in the process I caught the hem of my dress in the water. "Oh my God!" exclaimed Peyton, who was watching from the side. "Sydney, be careful. There are expensive plants in there." The photographer lowered her camera and looked at me worriedly. "Are you okay, Beverly?" Yeah, I'm fine." I straightened up, shaking off my dress. "I just tripped. Sorry about the branch." "It's okay, it's just a plant," Sydney reassured me. "The important thing is that you didn't fall." Peyton, however, looked upset. She stepped closer, examining the broken branch and the noticeable wet spot on my dress. "Look what you've done," she hissed quietly enough for only me to hear. "The dress is ruined and you've damaged the garden." "I didn't do it on purpose," I said quietly. "I just lost my balance." "Maybe you should sit down and rest," she said louder, with fake concern in her voice. "We can go on without you." "I'm perfectly fine," I insisted. "Let's get on with it." We walked over to a graceful white arbor covered with purple wisteria flowers. The air was filled with their sweet scent. Sydney arranged us in a new arrangement. Garrett and Peyton sat on a bench in the gazebo. The kids stood on the sides, and I was asked to stand behind them. After a few shots, Sydney suddenly frowned, looking at the screen of her camera. "There's something wrong with the light," she muttered. "Beverly, could you step to the side? Your shadow is falling on Peyton and Garrett." I obediently moved, but Peyton still didn't look pleased. She whispered something to Garrett, who nodded slightly in response. "You know," he said, turning to Sydney, "why don't we take a little break? The kids are probably tired." "Sure," Sydney agreed. "Will 10 minutes be enough?" "Sure." Garrett stood up and beckoned to the children. "Let's go get some ice cream at the kiosk." The children happily followed him. Peyton remained seated on the bench, looking at me with ill-concealed irritation. "Beverly," she began as Sydney stepped away to check her equipment. "I don't think it's working." "What isn't?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what she was talking about. "The whole thing," she made a wide gesture with her hand. "The photo shoot. You're always in the frame, but somehow wrong. Your dress is now stained, your hair is disheveled, and you look tired." "I am a little tired," I admitted, "but I can go on. This is a big day for you and Garrett." Peyton stood up and moved closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. "It's not just fatigue, you just don't fit in. We've spent so much money organizing this celebration, the photographer, the outfits. Everything has to be perfect." I felt a lump come up in my throat. "And I'm interfering with perfection?" "Don't pretend you don't understand." Her voice became sharper. "You've seen the pictures. We look like the family from the billboard, and you—" She didn't finish her sentence, but the look in her eyes said it all. That's when Garrett and the kids came back with the ice cream. "Is everything all right?" Garrett asked, noticing the tension between us. "Absolutely," Peyton said with a strained smile. "We were just discussing the best way to continue filming." Sydney suggested one last location, a large, spreading oak tree with a stone bench beneath it. "It would be the perfect final shot," she said. "The whole family together under the century-old tree is a symbol of strength and continuity between generations." We sat under the oak tree. Garrett and Peyton sat on a bench, the children in front of them, and I was asked to stand next to Garrett. The sun was starting to sink, creating the warm, golden lighting that photographers love. "It's perfect!" Sydney exclaimed. Now everyone say happy family together. Happy family, the children said together, smiling. At that moment, I noticed Peyton looking at me with ill-concealed disgust. Her gaze was fixed on the wet spot on my dress, which was even more visible in the setting sun. You know what? She said suddenly, rising from the bench. I think we've had enough pictures with the extended family. Why don't we take a few more shots of just us and the kids? Sydney looked a little puzzled. Sure, whatever you want. Beverly, could you step aside for a moment? I obediently stepped aside, feeling the color of shame flood my face. Sydney took a few more pictures, then checked the time. We have about 20 minutes left on our reservation, she announced. What other shots would you like to take? Peyton exchanged glances with Garrett, then turned to the photographer. Could we take some portraits of just the two of us? For the anniversary. Of course, Sydney nodded. The kids can wait on the bench with Grandma. Alwyn and Hugo ran up to me and we sat on the bench, watching Sydney arrange Peyton and Garrett in romantic poses under the tree. Hugo snuggled against my side, talking about the ice cream he'd just eaten, and Alwyn watched her parents thoughtfully. Grandma, she asked suddenly, why is Mom looking at you so strangely? I tensed, not knowing what to say. Strange? What do you mean? Well, like, angry? Alwyn frowned. Did you do something bad? No, dear, I replied softly. It's just that everyone's tired from the long photo shoot, and your mom wants everything to be perfect. Suddenly, I noticed Peyton look in our direction again, said something to Garrett, and they walked over to Sydney together. After a brief conversation that I couldn't hear, the photographer nodded and headed toward us. Hugo, Alwyn, she said with a smile. Your parents want to take some more pictures with you. Let's go over to them. The kids obediently got up and followed Sydney. I remained sitting on the bench, feeling a strange emptiness inside. No one told me to go with them. No one even looked in my direction like I was invisible. After a few minutes, Peyton took the kids aside and said something to them. Then she walked over to Garrett, and they started talking quietly, but obviously tensely. I watched Garrett shake his head several times as Peyton gestured insistently, pointing in my direction. Finally, he nodded reluctantly, and they walked toward me together. Mom, Garrett began, clearly feeling awkward. We were thinking, Peyton suggested. Beverly? Peyton interrupted him with a strained smile. You must be tired from this photo shoot, and your dress, with that stain. What are you saying? I looked them straight in the eye. Peyton sighed like she was losing her patience. Look, let's be honest. These pictures are very important to us. They'll be on the invitations, on the banners at the party, in our family album. And with that stain and that tired look. You want me to leave? I addressed Garrett directly, ignoring Peyton. My son looked away, unable to look me in the eye. It's just, maybe it's better if we finish the shoot without the old cleaning lady in the family photos! Peyton suddenly blurted out, losing her temper. I don't want to see an old cleaning lady in our perfect family photos! Her words came out so loudly that Sydney and the kids turned in our direction. There was a stunned silence. I felt the blood rush from my face. Peyton! Garrett looked shocked. You can't do that. Can't what? Peyton turned to him, her face contorted with anger. Tell the truth? Look at her, Garrett. Look at her wet, cheap dress, her aged hands, her wrinkles. She looks like a cleaning lady we hired for the day, not part of the family. Peyton, that's enough. Garrett raised his voice, but there was no real firmness in it. I slowly stood up from the bench, feeling my legs shake. I get it, I said quietly. I'm going to leave. Mom, wait. Garrett took a step toward me, but Peyton grabbed his arm. No, let him go, she said. It's better for everyone. We finish in 15 minutes and we'll get home on our own. I looked at my son, expecting him to object, to defend me, his mother. But Garrett was silent, his gaze darting between Peyton and me, then down to the ground. Okay, he finally said, not looking at me. Mom, maybe you should really go home. You look tired. At that moment, I realized I'd lost him. My son, my only child, had chosen his wife over me. He let her humiliate me and didn't have the strength to protect me. Grandma, don't go! Hugo shouted, breaking out of Sydney's arms, but Peyton stopped him abruptly. Hugo, stay where you are, she commanded. Grandma is tired and will go home to rest. We'll be done soon and come back too. I turned and walked away without looking back. Tears ran down my cheeks, but I didn't wipe them away. Pride was all I had left. I heard Sydney say something in a soothing tone, Alwyn asking why I was leaving, Peyton answering her too loud and too fake. Grandma's just really tired, honey. I walked down the alleys of the park, past happy families, past couples in love, past kids playing with balls and kites. No one paid any attention to me, just another elderly woman with a tear-stained face and a wet spot on her dress. The drive home seemed endless. I waited for the bus at the bus stop for a long time, trying to calm down and put my thoughts in order. The old woman sitting next to me gave me a few concerned glances, but didn't dare to speak. I guess my appearance was eloquent enough, a crumpled dress with a wet spot, disheveled hair, and eyes swollen with tears. When the bus finally arrived, I sat at the window and pressed my forehead against the cool glass. Houses and trees and people floated by, but all I could see was the picture that kept replaying over and over in my head. Peyton's angry face, her harsh words, old cleaning lady, and the downcast look on my son's face as he couldn't find the strength to defend his own mother. I got off at my stop and slowly wandered toward home. It felt strange going there, knowing it wasn't my home anymore, not for real. I'd given it to Garrett 5 years ago, thinking it was just a formality, that nothing would change. How wrong I was. The house greeted me with emptiness and silence. I turned on the hallway light and caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed alien, confused, broken, aged a dozen years in one day. I slowly took off my shoes, hung my bag on the hook, and walked into the kitchen. Pouring myself a glass of water, I sat down at the table and, for the first time that long day, allowed myself to fully comprehend what had happened. The humiliation hit me with renewed force. Not just Peyton's harsh words, but Garrett's acquiescence, his willingness to sacrifice my feelings for his wife's peace of mind. I remembered how many times I'd noticed him reacting the same way on lesser occasions, but I preferred to ignore them. Now I could no longer deny the obvious. I was powerless in this house, powerless in my own family. The clock on the wall read 4:30. The photo shoot must be over by now. They'd be back soon, Peyton, Garrett, and the kids. What should I tell them? How do I act? Pretend like nothing happened? Or do I finally say what I've been saying all these years? I went up to my room and changed into my house dress. I hung the new blue dress I'd soiled by the pond carefully on its hangers. I'd have to take it to the dry cleaners, though I doubt I'd have an excuse to wear it again. I washed off my makeup and brushed my hair, looking at my reflection in the small mirror on the dressing table. The familiar action calmed me down a little, but there was still a storm of emotions raging inside. Back downstairs, I began to prepare dinner. Mechanical actions helped me not to think about what had happened. Chop vegetables, put water for pasta, heat up the sauce. My hands moved on their own and my thoughts were far away. I remembered how Garrett had once been a little boy who'd proudly shown me his drawings, how he'd come to me with every scratch, how he'd fallen asleep listening to my stories. Where is that little boy? What happened to him, to us? Suddenly, the doorbell rang, snapping me out of my reverie. I flinched and looked at the clock. 5:10. Too early for the family to be back. They didn't usually get home before 6. Maybe a courier or mailman. I wiped my hands and went to open the door. Muriel Barrow, our neighbor on the left, stood on the threshold. We weren't close friends, but we'd always kept on polite terms. Muriel was about 65, living alone after the death of her husband and teaching literature at the local college. Good evening, Beverly. She smiled, but her eyes were serious. I'm sorry to bother you. I was wondering, would you like to come in for a cup of tea? I was confused by the sudden invitation. Thank you, Muriel, but I'm just preparing dinner for the family. They'll be back from a photo shoot soon, and I saw you on the bus, she interrupted gently. You were crying, and I thought maybe you needed someone to talk to. Not your family, but just someone from the outside. I froze, not knowing what to say. I really wanted to talk, but I wasn't used to sharing personal problems. But something in Muriel's eyes, understanding, sympathy without pity, made me nod. Yes, I think a cup of tea would be just what I need right now. Just let me turn off the stove. I quickly went back into the kitchen, turned off all the burners, and left a note on the table. Gone to Muriel's. Dinner is on the stove. Just need to heat it up. B. Muriel's house was the exact opposite of ours. Whereas Peyton had turned our house into a sterile space with minimalist design, Muriel's was a cozy nest filled with books, paintings, and memorabilia. There were live plants everywhere, and the aroma of freshly baked goods wafted from the kitchen. Sit down, Muriel pointed to a cushioned chair by the window. I've just baked a blueberry pie. Would you like some? I'd love one. I sank into the chair, feeling the tension slowly release in this warm, cozy atmosphere. Muriel put 2 cups of tea and a plate of pie on the table. She didn't rush me through the conversation, letting me get used to the surroundings and gather my thoughts. So, she said finally, as we took a sip of the flavorful tea, what happened today? And I told her everything. About the anniversary preparations, about how I was slowly being pushed aside, about today's photo shoot and Peyton's awful words, about Garrett not standing up for me, about how I'd walked home feeling like an old woman no one wanted. Muriel listened intently, not interrupting, only occasionally nodding or shaking her head sympathetically. When I finished, she was silent for a long time, staring into her cup as if she could find answers there. You know, Beverly, she said at last, I've been watching your family for years, and I'm afraid what happened today was inevitable. It's just the culmination of what's been happening gradually, day by day. What are you talking about? I looked at her in surprise. The way you've been treated, Muriel said, stepping forward. I've seen you carrying heavy bags of groceries when your son stays home. How you garden in the heat while your daughter-in-law reads magazines on the veranda. How you pick up your kids from school in the rain and snow. And yet I never once heard a word of gratitude from them. Her words hurt me because they were true. But I always thought it was the way it should be. I help my family. It's natural. They're just used to having me around, I tried to justify them. It doesn't mean they don't appreciate me. They don't, Beverly, Muriel said firmly. And today's incident proved it. They see you as a free assistant, not as a family member with your own feelings and dignity. I lowered my eyes, unable to object. Deep down, I knew she was right. What am I supposed to do now? I asked quietly. This is my home, my family. I can't just leave. Why can't you? Muriel stared at me. You have a pension. You could rent a small apartment, live on your own. At my age, I grinned bitterly. Starting over at 78? How long do you have left? She asked me bluntly. 10 years? 15? Do you want to spend them feeling like a servant in your own house? Or do you want to try to live for yourself? Her question took me by surprise. I'd never thought about it that way. How long do I have left? And how do I want to spend those years? I don't know if I can, I admitted honestly. I'm so used to taking care of them, thinking about them. What am I without that? You're Beverly Thorpe. Muriel took my hand. A woman who taught literature for 30 years and raised generations of students. A wife who supported her husband until his last day. A mother who raised her son and gave him everything she could. You don't stop being all of those things if you start living for yourself. I felt the tears come to my eyes again, but this time not from resentment, but from the sudden realization. Muriel was right. I had given so many years of my life to others that I had forgotten myself. And what did I get in return? The stigma of old janitor and the silent betrayal of my son. Even if I decide to leave, I said, wiping away my tears, where would I go? It's so expensive to rent an apartment now, and my pension is barely enough to... I have a guest house in the garden, Muriel interrupted. You've seen it, a little cottage behind my main house. It has only 1 bedroom, a sitting room, and a tiny kitchen, but it's enough for one person. I use it as a study and library, but I could move everything into the main house. Are you suggesting that I, live with you? I looked at her incredulously. Next to me, not at my place, Muriel corrected with a smile. You'll have your own space, and I won't charge you much for utilities. I'd feel better if I had someone to look after the house when I was away on my academic trips. The offer seemed too good to be true. I knew Muriel as a kind woman, but such generosity was unexpected. Why do you want to help me? I asked bluntly. We're not even close friends. Muriel sipped her tea thoughtfully before answering. You know, when my Richard died, I was about the same age you are now, and I was so lost, so alone. My children lived far away, my friends were busy with their families. I felt like nobody wanted me. She paused. And then a colleague suggested that I go with her to a conference in Paris, just for fun, because she didn't want to go alone. That trip changed my life. I felt alive again, interesting, needed. And I vowed to myself that if I ever met someone in a similar situation, I would reach out to them. Her candor touched me. We sat in silence, finishing our cooled tea, each immersed in her own thoughts. I need to think about it, I said at last. It's a big decision. Of course, Muriel nodded. Don't decide anything today. Just know that you have a choice. You don't have to stay where you're not respected. When I got home an hour later, the family was already there. Hugo rushed over to me, wrapping his arms around my waist. Grandma, where have you been? We came home and you were gone. I was at the neighbor's, honey. I stroked his head. I had tea with Muriel. Oh, with that old librarian, Peyton snorted as she came out of the kitchen. She seemed tense, but generally acted as if nothing had happened. Dinner was getting cold, so I had to reheat it. I'm sorry, I replied automatically, even though my inner voice was screaming, you should be the one apologizing. Garrett was sitting in the living room staring at his laptop. He looked up when I walked in, and something akin to guilt flashed across his face. Mom, he started hesitantly. About today. Not now, Garrett. I held up my hand, stopping him. I'm tired. We'll talk tomorrow. He nodded with visible relief, glad for the postponement of an unpleasant conversation. I went upstairs to my room saying I wasn't hungry and wanted to go to bed early. In my room, I sat on my bed and stared at the picture of Eugene on my bedside table for a long time. What would he say if he saw what our family had become? What would he tell me to do? I knew the answer. Eugene had always valued dignity and self-respect above all else. He wouldn't let anyone, not even his own son, treat him like a servant. And he would expect the same from me. I went to the window and pulled back the curtain. From my room, I could see Muriel's house and the little guest house at the back of her garden. It looked cozy and peaceful in the setting sun, a place where I could make a fresh start, a place where I would be the mistress of my life, not a powerless old woman from whom everyone expects only favors and silence. Suddenly, I felt a strange calmness and determination. I would talk to Garrett tomorrow, not to clear things up or demand an apology, but to let him know my decision. I'm going to leave this house and start living for myself. Maybe that's scary. It may be difficult, but it will be my life, my own life. I lay in bed, and for the first time in a long time, I fell asleep without anxiety or bitterness. I dreamed of Eugene, young and smiling, holding out his hand to me and saying, "You can do this, Bev. You've always been stronger than you thought." In the morning, I woke up with a clear head and a firm decision. While everyone was asleep, I quietly got up, got dressed, and went down to the kitchen. I made coffee and sat at the table, waiting for the house to start waking up. Today would be a new day. The day I would finally take my life into my own hands. Muriel peeked through the kitchen door. I hadn't heard her enter the house. "Good morning," she smiled. "I'm sorry it's so early, but I wanted to talk to you before everyone woke up. I thought about our conversation last night and I got up and walked over to her. I agree, I said simply. I want to move into your guest house." Muriel looked at me carefully, as if to see if I were sure of my decision. "You're not in a hurry, are you? It's a big step." "I've never been so sure," I said. "It's time for me to start living for myself." She smiled and hugged me tightly. "Welcome to your new life, Beverly Thorpe." Moving into Muriel's guest house was surprisingly easy, at least technically. I didn't have a lot of personal belongings, and Muriel kindly helped move them in her car. Just 3 trips, and my books, clothes, photos, memorabilia were all in their new home. Emotionally, of course, it was much more difficult. I still remember Garrett's face when I informed him of my decision over breakfast the day after the photo shoot. At first, he laughed, thinking I was joking. Then, when he realized I was serious, he tried to talk me out of it, convincing me that I was exaggerating and dramatizing the situation. "Mom, what Peyton said. She didn't mean it," he insisted. glancing nervously toward the stairs as if he was afraid his wife would come down and overhear our conversation. She was stressed about the photo shoot, all those preparations for the anniversary. You know how she can be under pressure. I know, I said calmly. And that's why I'm leaving. I don't want to be the target of anyone else's frustration and annoyance anymore. I deserve better, Garrett. But where are you going to go? He looked genuinely concerned, and for a moment I saw him as the caring boy I'd raised. You're 78, Mom. You can't just start living on your own. Why not? I gave him a hard look. I'm sane. I can take care of myself, and I have a pension. And I'll be staying in Muriel Barrow's guest house. She's offered to rent it to me for a nominal fee. Garrett looked stunned. You've already decided? Without even consulting me? Did you consult me when you let Peyton kick me out of the photo shoot? I asked quietly, and he lowered his eyes. I'm not asking your permission, Garrett. I'm informing you of my decision out of respect for you as my son. When the news reached Peyton, her reaction was predictable. First, ostentatious surprise and resentment. How can you do this to us after all we've done for you? Then anxiety, but not for me, but for disrupting their routine. Who's going to pick up the kids from school? I have work. Garrett has business meetings. The kids reacted differently. Alwyn, who resembled her mother in her practicality, accepted the situation quickly, though I could see she was upset. Hugo cried and begged me to stay, promising to be the most obedient grandson in the world. His tears tore at my heart, but I knew I had to be firm. I'll be right here, honey, I comforted him, hugging him. At Mrs. Barrow's cottage, 2 houses down from you. You can come and visit me whenever you want. Promise? He looked at me with tearful eyes. I promise, I kissed his forehead. And we'll bake those chocolate chip cookies you love so much. My new place was exactly as Muriel had described it. Small but cozy. 1 bedroom, a living room with a kitchen area, a tiny bathroom. Muriel had cleared out most of her books, leaving only a few shelves of the classics she knew I loved. The furniture was simple but comfortable, and the windows had a lovely view of the manicured garden. I spent my first evening alone in my new home, getting used to the silence and independence. It was a strange feeling to know that no one would be knocking on the door asking me to iron my shirt or watch the kids while my parents were at a business dinner. No one would criticize my choice of books to read or sigh if I watched an old movie on TV. I could do what I wanted, when I wanted, and that freedom was both intoxicating and terrifying. In the morning, I woke up at first light, a habit developed over the years. But instead of jumping up and starting to make breakfast for the family, I let myself lie in bed, enjoying the peace and quiet. Then I got up slowly, made myself a cup of coffee, not too strong, like Garrett liked, but just the way I liked it, and went out into the small front yard with it. Muriel was working in the garden, pruning the rose bushes. Good morning, she waved at me. How did you sleep in your new place? Surprisingly well, I smiled, lifting my cup in a welcoming gesture. Thank you for everything, Muriel. You're welcome, she set the garden shears aside. I don't have a lecture today. Why don't we go to the town center? I'm sure you've got some things to buy for the house. I agreed, and an hour later we were shopping in Mountain Brook. I bought a few things for the kitchen, new linens and curtains for the bedroom. Muriel didn't rush me, waiting patiently as I looked at each item, comparing prices, making decisions. It was so different from shopping with Peyton, who was always in a hurry and annoyed by my slowness. After shopping, we went to a small cafe on the corner of the main street. I'd never been there before, even though I'd walked past it hundreds of times. They have the best blueberry muffins in town, Muriel said, ordering us each one. And a good espresso. Sitting at the window overlooking the street, watching the passers-by and savoring the unexpectedly delicious muffin, I felt like a tourist in my own city. How many places like this had I missed over the years, rushing home to make dinner or clean up before Peyton arrived? What are you thinking about? Muriel asked, noticing my blank stare. About how much I'd missed, I answered honestly. I've lived in this town for so many years, but I know so little about it. Well, she smiled. Now you have time to catch up? Time. The word sounded like a promise. Time for myself. Time for new discoveries. Time for the life I had put off for so long. I spent the first week in my new home settling in and getting used to being on my own. I cooked only for myself, which was harder than I thought. It was always too much. I sorted through my things, arranged my books, hung up my pictures. Eugene smiled at me from the living room wall, and I felt like he approved of my changes. On the 8th day, there was a knock on the door. I opened it and saw Garrett with Hugo. My grandson threw himself joyfully around my neck. "Grandma, I missed you so much." I hugged him, feeling my heart overflow with love. "I missed you too, honey." Garrett shifted from foot to foot, clearly feeling uncomfortable. "Can I come in?" he finally asked. I stepped back, letting them into the house. Hugo immediately started looking around curiously. "It's so cool. It's like a little house from a fairy tale." Garrett looked around with a more critical expression. "It's cramped," he said, "and there's no proper kitchen." "One is enough for me," I shrugged. "Would you like some tea?" While Hugo looked at my books, Garrett finally got to the purpose of his visit. "Mother," he began hesitantly, "I understand that you're offended, and you have every right to be. But don't you think it's an overreaction? Moving at that age, starting to live on your own?" "I'm 78, not 108, I reminded him gently. "And I'm not alone. Muriel's there for me if I need help." "Yes, but," he hesitated. "Mom, the kids miss you, and I miss you too." "You're welcome to come visit," I smiled. "And I'd love to see you, all of you." "It's not the same." He lowered his voice so Hugo wouldn't hear. "Look," Peyton said she overreacted. She was under pressure about the photo shoot and the anniversary. You know what a perfectionist she is. "I know," I nodded. "And I don't hold it against her, but that doesn't change my mind." "Why not?" He sounded genuinely uncomprehending. "If you're not angry, why don't you come home?" "Because it's not my home anymore, Garrett." I looked him straight in the eye. And to be honest, it hadn't been for a long time. I was a stranger there. Comfortable, useful, but not part of the family. Not really. "That's not true," he objected, but there was a twinkle of guilt in his eyes. "Was it?" I sighed. "When was the last time you asked me about my day? Not about whether I made dinner or washed your shirts, but how I was feeling, what I was thinking, what I cared about?" He was silent, unable to find an answer. "You see," I smiled sadly. "I'm not blaming you, Garrett. You have your own life, your own worries. But I have to have my own life. And I want to live what I have left with dignity and self-respect." Hugo ran up to us, interrupting a serious conversation. "Grandma, when are we going to bake cookies? You promised." "Next time you come to visit," I promised. "Maybe this weekend?" "Yes!" He jumped up and down with joy. "Daddy, can I come to Grandma's on Saturday?" Garrett nodded absently, still considering my words. Soon they left Hugo with a promise to come back soon. Garrett with a thoughtful and slightly confused expression on his face. 2 weeks later, Peyton came in, alone, without the children, with a strained smile and a box of cakes from an expensive candy store. "Beverly," she kissed the air next to my cheek ceremoniously. "What a lovely house. It's very cozy." I invited her in, offered her tea. She looked around with the same critical expression as Garrett, but more obvious. "It must be damp here at night?" she asked. "And the heating must not be very reliable in such an old building?" "Everything works fine," I assured her. Muriel had recently done some renovations. We sat down at the small table in the living room. Peyton carefully sipped her tea, set the cup down, and got down to business. "Beverly, I came to apologize," she said, with the air of someone performing an unpleasant but necessary duty. "What I said at the photo shoot was inappropriate. I was under pressure, worried about the quality of the pictures. You know how important this anniversary is to me." "I understand," I said calmly, "and I accept your apology." "That's great." She glowed. "Will you come home then? The kids miss you so much. And frankly, things have gone downhill without you." Hugo forgot his gym uniform twice this week, and Alwyn had a tantrum because no one helped her study for her math test. That's it. No concern for me, no remorse, just a simple desire to get back the free assistant who solved all the household problems. "I'm not coming back, Peyton," I said firmly. "But I can help with the kids if you need me to." They can come to me after school and I'll help them with their homework. But it's so inconvenient, she grimaced. They'd have to walk 2 houses over in all kinds of weather. And what about dinners? Garrett says he misses your casseroles. I can give you the recipes, I offered. They're easy. Peyton stared at me in disbelief, as if she couldn't understand why I was turning down such a generous offer to return to domesticity. I don't understand, she said finally. I apologized. What more do you want? Nothing, I shook my head. I do accept your apology and I don't hold a grudge, but I'm not going back to my old life. I like my independence. At your age? She didn't hide her skepticism. Beverly, be realistic. What if you get sick, fall down? Who's going to take care of you? The same social services that take care of thousands of other elderly people who live on their own, I replied calmly. I'm not disabled, Peyton, and I'm not going to give up my life out of fear of hypothetical problems. She walked away visibly annoyed, barely touching her brownie. I knew this wasn't her last attempt to bring me home and prepared myself for more visits and conversations. They did indeed follow. Garrett came twice more, each time with new arguments. First, he appealed to my maternal sense. The kids were suffering without a grandmother. Then he appealed to practicality. It's expensive to maintain a separate place, and my pension isn't that great. Finally, my age and health. What if I get sick at night and no one is around? Each time I listened to him patiently and gently but firmly refused. I saw his bewilderment gradually change to understanding and then to respect for my decision. He began to bring the children to visit regularly, sometimes stayed for tea, told me about his work. Our relationship slowly changed, becoming more equal, more adult. Peyton changed tactics too. After several unsuccessful attempts to get me to come back, she began sending the children alone, hoping that their presence in my home would make me feel guilty for under-engaging with them. But I enjoyed the time with my grandchildren even more than before. Without Peyton's constant supervision, without her criticisms of how I was spoiling them or raising them wrong, our gatherings became more genuine and joyful. Hugo and I baked cookies and read adventure books. With Alwyn, we did math, which was suddenly her favorite subject, and talked about books. It turned out that she had inherited my love of literature, but had hidden it from her mother, who thought fiction was a waste of time. Gradually, my life found a new rhythm. In the mornings, I had breakfast in my little patio, weather permitting or at the window, looking out at Muriel's garden. Then I would do housework or read. In the afternoon, I often went out into the city, to the library, to the park, sometimes to a cafe where they already knew me by name and had the best table for me by the window. Twice a week, I met my grandchildren after school, helped them with their lessons, and fed them an afternoon snack. On weekends, we sometimes went on excursions to the Natural History Museum, the Botanical Gardens, once even to a neighboring town for a dinosaur exhibit, which Hugo loved. Muriel and I became good friends. She introduced me to her colleagues at the college, and I began attending open lectures on literature and history. After one of these lectures, a history professor, recognizing that I was a former teacher, invited me to speak to the students about the methods of teaching literature in my day. I agreed, although I was terribly nervous. The lecture went surprisingly well. The students listened attentively, asked questions, and afterwards several people came up to thank me for the interesting story. The professor offered me a few more such meetings, and I gladly agreed. For the first time in many years, I felt that my experience and knowledge were valued, that I could be useful not only as a housekeeper and nanny. 3 months after I moved to Mountain Brook, spring returned. Muriel's garden bloomed, filled with color and fragrance. I often sat on a bench among the flowering bushes, enjoying the warm sunshine and the sense of peace I had finally found. One of those days, Garrett came to me unexpectedly. Alone, without children, with a serious expression on his face. "Mom," he said, sitting down next to me on the bench, "I want to apologize. For real, not like Peyton, who just wanted to bring you home to take care of us again." I looked at him in surprise. "What exactly are you apologizing for?" "Everything." He took a deep breath. "For letting you feel unwanted in your own home, for not standing up for you at that photo shoot, for taking your care for granted for years without thinking about what you wanted, what you needed." His words touched me to the core. I could see the sincere remorse in his eyes, and I felt that he really understood what had happened between us. "Thank you," I said quietly. Your apology means a lot to me. I'm not asking you to come back, he added hastily. I can see that you're happy here. I just want you to know that I've realized my mistakes and I miss you. The real you, not the convenient grandmotherly housekeeper you were to us. We talked for a long time that day. For the first time in years, we really talked about his work and his hidden dreams of creativity, about my new life and college lectures, about the kids and their future. When he left, it was as if a new bond had formed between us, more mature, more respectful on both sides. Things were more complicated with Peyton. She never fully accepted my choice, continuing to see it as the bliss of an old woman who didn't know what was best for her. But even she began to treat me with more respect, especially after she heard about my college performances. The status of a guest lecturer, albeit unofficial, impressed her. Gradually, our relationship found a new balance. I was no longer a disenfranchised old woman tolerated out of a sense of duty. I was now Beverly Thorpe, a woman who, at 78, had found the courage to start a new life and proved that it was never too late to assert her dignity. On my 79th birthday, Muriel threw a little party in the garden. Garrett and the kids came. Peyton was in a business meeting. A few of Muriel's colleagues I'd become friends with, and even a couple of students who'd attended my lectures. Sitting at the festively set table, listening to the laughter and conversation around me, I caught myself thinking that for the first time in years I felt truly happy. Not just content or resigned to my fate, but happy, full of life, of plans, of hope. Hugo ran up to me with a homemade card, a drawing of me standing in the center with everyone else around me who had come to the party. To the best grandmother in the world, it said on top in uneven, childish handwriting. Do you like it? He asked hopefully. Very much. I hugged him, tears welling up in my eyes. It's the best present ever. You know what? He whispered conspiratorially. Mom said you've been so much happier since you moved here. She said you look younger. I smiled, surprised by that observation from Peyton. I think she's right, I replied. I do feel younger. And it was true. Freeing myself from being a disenfranchised servant in my own family was like a weight lifted off my shoulders. I had found my way, my home, my life. And even though I was 79, I knew that the best days of my life were ahead of me.